Well, welcome to this, my second to last posting before I head off to the UK. And I'm focusing this one on provisions and supplies. It's literally almost the last thing I'm doing before I leave on Sunday week. And when I talk about provisioning and supplies, I'm talking about certainly food and whatever beverages I want on board, but I'm also talking about spare parts and the clothing that I've got a list for packing before I head off. But let me start with the food equation first. Here's a picture of Robin Knox Johnson at the dock just before he left on his 314-day trip. Now, my trip to the UK is not that long. My first leg is going to be about 8 weeks, but even packing for 8 weeks is a logistical challenge. And what I've done is actually pack for 120 days of food and also clothing, and I'll get to the clothing bit in just a minute. But from a food and provisions viewpoint, I've been blessed by having a daughter who is a dietitian. And she's worked out a formula for me which basically says I need to consume about 3,000 calories a day on an active day and about 2,500 calories on a sort of less active day. And she's worked that out taking account of body mass and the sort of activities that I'll undertake on a daily basis. 3,000 calories is a lot. And she's worked out for me a meal plan which looks like this. And you can see there's breakfast, there's lunch, there's dinners, and there's snacks. And in looking at the options that are available in that meal plan and what I've got on board, I can pretty much regulate my calorie intake. Some of my friends have been horrified to see this picture. It's got cans of Spam. It's got lots of cans in there. What it didn't show was some dried and dehydrated foods which were already on board. And for the trip to the UK, I'll at least be able to have fresh vegetables for probably at least 6 weeks with proper storage. So I'm able to take things like potatoes, cabbage, pumpkin, as fresh foods, and also some fruits which will last a few weeks as well. It's one thing to have a list of all of this, but it's actually got to fit in to the boat. And I've spent a couple of weeks just reconfiguring the storage capacity on Mushka, taking stuff out, fitting shelves, and creating the space that will accommodate something like 600 kilo of just the food alone. Now, there's a thing in the Golden Globe race that says you can only have on board what Robin Knox Johnson had on board. And I've got lots of brandy, lots of rum, and more beer than I could ever consume, but I'm just doing what Robin Knox Johnson did. With regard to clothing, most of this trip, certainly the first 8 weeks, is through the Southern Ocean. And I'll be at latitudes of around 40 degrees south. The air temperature through the Southern Hemisphere summer at about 40 degrees south is somewhere around 10 to 12 degrees centigrade. But there's a wind chill factor involved in that as well, and there's also, it's just a damp, wet environment. So I've paid a lot of attention to the gear that I'm taking that will keep me both dry and warm. I know me well after the number of years that I've lived, so keeping my head warm, which has little hair, is a priority. And you can see these rabbit fur lined caps. I've got a couple of these and some other ones as well that just, I've tried them and they're absolutely magnificent for keeping both scalp and ears warm. Feet, extremities, keeping those warm, both hands and feet. And I'm taking with me some 25 pairs of pure wool socks. Now, wool's really important. Keeping it dry is even more important. And if one of those pairs of socks gets wet, a new pair is coming on. I've got a great pair of boots, which are these here. They're both Gore-Tex and leather, probably the most expensive pair of footwear I've ever bought, girls. But they serve a purpose, and they do keep my feet dry, and the wool socks will keep my feet warm. I've got mittens and gloves, because if my fingers get cold, well, that's not a comfortable thing either. So keeping warm is critical. In terms of just what's on my body, I've got a base layer, a mid layer, and then a couple of jacket choices. This is a lighter weight jacket, but there's a HPX Gore-Tex jacket as well for colder weather. Spare parts. There's a list of spare parts for an activity like this that really I've just had to think through carefully, and I've discovered in my boating over the years that you need plenty of spare parts, but generally you end up using that spare part for reasons it was never intended. You've just got to be resourceful when something goes wrong. So I've focused particularly in terms of spare parts on things like my steering, both the wind vane and for the trip to the UK. I've got a wheel pilot. I've got plenty of spares for both the wind vane and the wheel pilot itself. But also for the rigging, I've got plenty of spare blocks and gudgeons and shackles, and lots of spare cable as well, if in case I have to innovate around something that goes wrong. So most of this stuff, of course, is occurring in the last week or two before I'm leaving, but it requires some careful thought. I hope you found this interesting. It's certainly just another part of what's been a pretty fascinating and challenging project. Thanks for watching.